Welcome to Dare to be Healthy. This is your host Alia Almoayed. I'm sitting today with Patrick Holford. Patrick has recently published this book called Say No to Diabetes, and I think that's very relevant to the Middle East especially, and to the Gulf region prominently because of the cases of diabetes. But
I call this area the diabesity capital of the world.
The diabesity capital. I actually love that word because it has a lot of implications. But you are now telling people that they can reverse and heal from diabetes, whereas they must have been told otherwise. How do you back that up?
Yeah, this is a shift. People have been told that you can only control diabetes and that you have to have medication to do that. And yet the research is showing, and our own studies and case histories are showing very clearly that type 2 diabetes, which is 9 out of 10 cases of diabetes, so it's the adult onset diabetes, is a reversible condition, absolutely, especially if you've only had it for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And what can you say? The basis of the diagnosis of diabetes is blood sugar levels, and if you are able to get your blood sugar levels to an optimum place with diet and supplements, which you can do, then you end up really having reverse diabetes. We have people who have not had diabetes for over 10 years, so they've completely stabilized their blood sugar just with diet.
And what's the concept based on? What is the basis?
Well, I think one of the slight misunderstandings is that we know that if a person is significantly overweight, their risk for diabetes is 77 times higher. So hence diabesity. The two tend to go together. So the belief has been that if you lower your weight, you then control diabetes. And since the old thinking was that the way to lose weight is to cut your calories, and the easiest way to cut your calories is to avoid fat, we've been recommending people wrongly to eat low-calorie, low-fat diets. Now, the new thinking, which is very, very clear in the research, is that actually it's loss of blood sugar control that leads to both diabetes and weight gain, particularly around the middle, out the waist. And the simple way of explaining that is that when you eat something very sweet, I mean, for example, if you have a can of cola drink, it's 10 teaspoons of sugar. Now, you only need 3 teaspoons of glucose floating around your blood because that supplies the cells. So if you have 10, you've got 7 more than you need. So what happens to the excess? And the answer is the hormone called insulin takes it to the liver, and the liver's job is to put it into storage as fat in the nearest place possible, which is around the middle. So it's an absolute fact that excess sugar converts to fat, makes you fat. And over time what happens is you have to produce more and more and more insulin to cope with more and more and more sugar. And also refined foods, so white bread, white rice, white pasta, cakes, that kind of thing. They also are providing sugar. So after a while you produce so much insulin that you become deaf or insensitive to insulin, and this is called insulin resistance. So now you're really losing your blood sugar control, and you're turning a lot of sugar into fat. So that's what happens. And the revolution, and my book is part of many experts who are talking about this, is to eat a low GL or low glycemic load diet. And that means choosing foods that naturally release their sugar content slowly, number 1, and number 2, eating protein with carbohydrate. So for example, bananas, dates and raisins, which are very common foods in this part of the world, are incredibly high in sugar, and a kind of sugar that is similar to glucose, so it's fast releasing. But berries, cherries and plums, which are not so common, are high in a different kind of sugar called xylose, which has very little effect on your blood sugar. So sometimes it's about not having cornflakes, which are fast releasing, but having an oat-based cereal with berries, cherries and plums rather than dates, raisins and bananas. But also, if you eat protein with carbohydrate. So you have some fish with some rice or some meat, with potatoes or whatever it happens to be. Then you further stabilize your blood sugar. And a very simple example that most people can relate to is that if you're hungry and you have a piece of fruit, does it satisfy you? And most people say, not really.
You're hungry again
You're
in 10
still,
minutes.
and there's this feeling that even though you kind of had enough of the fruit, maybe the apple, you're not satisfied. But if you had an apple with a few nuts or seeds, and anything you plant in the ground, nut, seed or bean, is protein, so maybe a few almonds or a few pistachios, the effect is very different. And these are some very simple principles of the low GL diet. And the amazing thing, and I have to say, when I first formulated this 10 years ago, and I didn't know just how effective it would be, but we now have 10 years of people who, many people say they're losing 6 kilos, 7 kilos a month with no hunger because of the diet, and blood pressure comes down, cholesterol comes down, blood sugar comes down. And when I started to research the diabetes book, it was clear that that diet works very, very well, but also chromium works well, which is a very inexpensive and safe supplement. There are also certain powders that are very high in soluble fibers, and if you have them before a meal with water, that further slows down the blood sugar control. And even something very simple like vitamin C, which is again a relatively inexpensive supplement. One study recently found that if a person has an intake of vitamin C equivalent to 1 gram, which unfortunately would either mean a lot of fruit, and in this region that probably would mean more sugar. So I supplement 1 gram a day. It cuts diabetes risk by 62%. And there was a study in India that gave people 1 gram of vitamin C, and it really lowered their blood sugar.
Well, how does that work? How does the vitamin C affect insulin?
Well, I don't know that is completely known, but what does happen is that in the state of diabetes and also heart disease and also obesity, the body goes into a state of inflammation. So most diabetics will talk about having things that hurt. The joints hurt, or various bits hurt in effect. Also the eyes start to get damaged, which is inflammatory. The nerves start to get damaged. And vitamin C is a very potent, it's called an antioxidant, but it also reduces inflammation. We also know that vitamin C protects the eyes from damage once you have a significant amount. So it's a very good question. I don't think the mechanism is exactly known, but it does work. Now, of course, in the old days, people would have been eating more fruit and vegetables rich in vitamin C, but they would have been exercising a lot. So there's nothing wrong with eating a banana, if you're about to, go for a long run, or, if you're a construction worker, and so on. But the trouble is we're eating the same food, that we used to eat,
behind our desks
but doing no exercise. And then what happens is when you lose your blood sugar control, you not only gain weight, but you lose energy. So now you start to feel tired all the time. And the fact is, if you feel tired, it's incredibly hard to get up and, go to the gym or do some exercise. On the other hand, if you're feeling full of energy, then you think, I will, go for a run or a swim or whatever it happens to be. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle. So when people improve their nutrition, they get much more energy, and as a consequence, they want to exercise.
Well, let's give people an idea of how they can differentiate between a food that's high GL and low GL. I know you have a whole list in the book of what foods are classified as what and what their GL is, but the likely of people carrying the book with them and saying, I'll have this, what is a good indicator?
Well, talking in terms of, also in terms of Arabic foods, Middle Eastern foods and what's available, the fluffier and lighter and sweeter, the worst. So, if it's a cake or a bun or something which is quite light, quite sugary and white, it's going to be high GL. So if it's made from the whole grain and therefore is browner, the better. It would be better to have flat bread than it would be to have, bread.
You said that yesterday, but how does that work?
Basically the longer you cook something, the more you break the sugars down. And when you feed yeast sugar in the presence of flour, it creates bubbles. And it's a little bit like the sort of duvet effect.
Yes.
And when you bake that, you get a lot of heat, and the heat actually turns complex sugars into simple sugars. It starts to break things down. So I mean, even if you put a piece of bread in your mouth and chew it, it actually becomes sweeter. So when you have a flatbread like a chapati, is raw flour.
Yeah. Or these German breads that are
Well, the
very
German
dense.
breads are very good where you can actually see the grain.
Yeah.
So the darker, and pasta is raw flour, which is then cooked for maybe 8 minutes.
Yeah.
And in Italy, they always eat the pasta al dente. It's almost hard. So brown rice is better than white rice. So you're always trying to stay away from the white stuff. And by the way, when you refine sugar, you remove 98% of the chromium. So part of the problem is you're removing the very nutrients that help to stabilize blood sugar. Now, you want to have less carbohydrates. So when you're eating, you want to have less rice, less bread, less pasta, less of those starchy things. So, and you want to have a lot more vegetables. So the trick is to fill yourself up with a lot of vegetables. So if you're eating and you have some meat, some vegetables, some rice, you actually want to have a lot more vegetables, less rice, and the amount of meat or fish you need in a meal is about what would fit into the palm of your hand.
Okay.
So whenever you do eat something that's carbohydrate, you always want to have some protein. So if you have jam on toast, this is like sugar on sugar.
Yeah.
But if you had even peanut butter on toast, or if you had some hummus from the chickpea, so this is protein, with some flatbread, that would be good. If you had it with raw carrot, that would be good. And I look at like tabbouleh, it's fantastic, with all the greens. So you want to have brightly colored food like baba ganoush and hummus, and the full, the beans. So if, for example, in the morning you wanted to have some eggs, which don't raise your cholesterol, they're really good food, and you had them with some full, already you're doing very, very well.
But eggs and fish and those proteins would have no GL, is that correct?
That's right, they have no GL because they have no carbohydrate.
So they don't raise the blood sugar?
They don't raise the blood sugar. And the thing is, if you learn how to eat to stabilize your blood sugar, it's blood sugar dips that make you hungry. And the fact is that if you are hungry, you are going to eat.
Yeah.
So the trick is to learn how to eat in a way that makes you feel completely full. And people are amazed when they do the low GL diet. Sometimes they think they are eating more food, they are eating more often, the hunger completely goes away, and really without effort, the weight starts to come off. And when you experience that increase in energy and the loss in weight, it becomes habit forming. So there is no compliance issue here. Months later, so many people who want to tell me how it is for them, it's extraordinary. They almost always end by saying, it's not a diet, it's just become my way of life.
Yeah.
And it isn't difficult. And if you do eat out, I always say eat from a restaurant from the country where the people are thinnest. Right?
That's a good method to.
So we had Thai dinner last night,
Yeah.
and the Thai people have a very low rate of diabetes, heart disease, obesity, and so on, and also the Chinese. So those kind of foods, but also traditional Middle Eastern foods. The traditional foods are fantastic. Olives, by the way,
Mediterranean in general.
Yeah, has no GL at all.
Yeah.
So they're a very, very good snack. And the real problem is that we've started to eat like the West.
Yeah.
You're eating like my country or America, which is a very bad
And the dynamics
diet,
are changing.
without any exercise, and in a culture where the genes would predispose towards diabetes, where the local fruits are naturally very high in sugar because you have the very intense sun.
Because of the heat as well. Yeah.
Because of the heat. And I'm afraid that combination is a recipe for disaster. And most people now are digging their own graves with a knife and fork.
Well, a lot of people, what I've found is that I have the hardest time convincing people to go with the low GL diet because of the fat phobia that everybody has. I mean, we live in a society where we've been brainwashed not to have avocados, not to be afraid of nuts, and then now you're telling them to leave the fruits or leave the very high sweet fruits, so not the fruit salad, and have peanut butter instead, and that can be very scary for some people.
No, it is scary, but within 5 days people notice the difference. So the thing is, like, you know, I say to people, don't believe anything I say.
Just
you know, be skeptical, doesn't matter, just do it for 1 week. And within 1 week you can experience a benefit, and then you're likely to keep going.
Well, you say that this is something that in a few years' time will become mainstream with treating diabetes. Why are doctors still telling people to lose weight with by cutting calories and cutting out fat?
Well, I think it's just become you know, the tradition, the way things are done. And you know, most doctors, with no disrespect, they don't get a lot of nutrition education in the original medical training. And most doctors, you know, have less than 10 minutes with a person. The fact is, in 10 minutes you really can't have a conversation that is likely to significantly change behavior. So some doctors work with dietitians, you know, which is a step in the right direction, and they have a bit more time, but still the tradition is low fat, low calorie diet. Now the research in the last 10 years, and it's only really in the last 10 years, it's starting to gather momentum to show that it's low GL eating. But we don't really have the kind of established way to do that. And I hope that one of the big contributions in my work is that I've worked out a way. You have 10 GLs for breakfast. That's easy to understand in the book. 5 GL snack, so 10 GL for a main meal, 5 GL for a snack. It's a very doable thing. And if you like, that's the sort of technology, in the same way that all those calorie counters, you know, was the technology. But of course the food industry is involved as well, and they sort of came behind the low calorie, low fat thing. So you can see the calorie content on the food, you can see the fat content on the food. And most low fat foods have more carbohydrate, for the very simple reason that if you're hungry, you are going to eat. And if you've been told not to eat fat, you've got to eat something. So in America, they've cut the total calories from fat by about 20% the last 20 years. And they've increased the calories from carbohydrate by about 20%. So in the end, it's no different. And actually, obesity continues to rise, diabetes. I mean, it shocks me to think that by 2030, we are expecting to have 500 million people in the world with diabetes. I mean, you know, the population of 7 billion, you know, it's a lot of people. It
becomes the norm at some point.
I mean, and it's terrible. We are going to see children dying of the complications of diabetes before their parent. It's a real tragedy. But the good news is reversible. I mean, in my, you know, yesterday I was doing a workshop here, diabetes workshop. I hope to come back and do more. Maybe you'll help me.
I hope so.
You know, because we need nutritionists here talking in this way. But you know, one man, after several years of diabetes, it took him 8 weeks to reverse his diabetes, and in 3 months he lost 20 kilos. And this was about 4 or 5 months ago. So he's feeling absolutely fantastic, completely stable blood sugar. He doesn't need medication anymore. I think it's important for people not to change their medication without speaking with their doctor. But you really can do this. And that's the most important message to get across, that type 2 diabetes is a reversible condition.
I hope so, and I hope that people understand that with your book and with all the efforts that you're doing, especially, that it's not a diet where you'll feel hungry and you'll feel tired, and you know, people are afraid of changing their lifestyle too much because of maybe social obligations, especially because you know, social obligations here are a big part of society. So but I mean, thank you so much for the work that you do, and I hope that you continue to help all these people with diabetes.
Thank you.
This is the book, Say No to Diabetes, and that's it from me. Thank you for watching.